I spend entirely too much time thinking about starships. Usually mid-size utilitarian starships with guns on them. But while our current understanding of physics leaves some room to maybe theoretically wedge in faster than light travel, no one has any real idea how to actually do it. Based on our current understanding, we have to accept that faster than light interstellar travel on cool blaster-festooned spacecraft may forever be the stuff of fiction. I have to stress that. We should take a lesson from the old sci-fi trope where someone exclaims, "That's impossible," as it's happening in front of them. But for now, perhaps forever, warp drives in hyperspace are not options. And if we ever do find a way, there's the possibility that understanding how to travel faster than light would so radically alter our understanding of the universe that space boats full of space sailors saluting each other will be as absurd as a horse-drawn jumbo jet or Martians invading Earth for whale oil. And yet, in one form or another, the starship is likely to persist not only as a storytelling device, a mythological construct, but as a hazy shadow of some future thing. Because a ship isn't just a box with a means of propulsion. It's one of our conceptual building blocks. Whether we're looking at the basic concepts of human technology, our cultural imperatives, and even ships as liminal spaces, both in terms of physical space and story, the ship is a foundational concept. Such concepts run deeper than the engineering capability or scientific models of any given time. They shape how we think on a very basic level, and they shape how we use our acquired knowledge. And we can conceptualize things long before we can build them. Let's imagine that by some miracle of pseudoscience, I can both travel back in time and speak ancient Greek. And I find myself talking to an Athenian who wants to know if I escaped from Hades or something. He mentions that he was a sailor in the Peloponnesian War. There was only one at the time. He calls it something else, but I know what he means. And I tell him of a war that my people fought in Mesopotamia. We came on ships, I tell him. Enormous ships the size of small cities. Preposterous, he says. You couldn't get enough rowers on the flanks to move such a ship. He talks about the strength of oar shafts, the amount of food and water it takes to keep one rower per day multiplied by thousands, waste disposal. He really nitpicks the premise. He's that guy. I explained that the ship needs neither oars nor sails. Rather, it's pushed through the water by a spinning shaft. This all sounds rather fanciful, but he indulges me. What makes the shaft spin, he asks. Now, trying to explain a nuclear reactor and steam turbine to a 4th century BC Greek sailor. I end up talking about self-heating rocks, boiling water to spin a wheel. I can tell he thinks it's all technobabble bullshit to make the story work. Then I start in with the flying machines, at which point he gets up and tells me my story is ridiculous, giant mechanical birds and city ships made of iron that doesn't sink and rowed by magic stones will never exist, and I should tell a story for grown men, not children. All right, no more technobabble, I promise. The rest of the story is about sailors taking their enormous ship across the sea, about men fighting in the desert, a story of an army seizing great palaces and tearing down monuments erected by a tyrant to the glory of himself. When he asked why the war was fought, I tell him the usual: wealth, trade, maybe national honor, lies. Everyone has a different answer. He understands all that. A Nimitz-class aircraft carrier seems like a fantastical thing, but sailors at sea, men at war, these things he understands. These are foundational concepts to him. His people, too, fight over wealth and power, to avenge slights, over words broken and oaths betrayed, but always with a few getting wealthier while many die. And they do travel in ships. The story resonates with him so much that it feels like maybe, in some fantastical way, it could almost be real. He can't be certain if my story is a true account or merely the ramblings of a fool, but we know that certain things have remained constant for thousands of years. The technobabble I gave that Athenian sailor won't let him build a nuclear aircraft carrier any more than careful study of a Star Trek technical manual will allow me to build a warp drive in my garage. But it does suggest that if we ever understand enough about the universe we exist within and how to manipulate it at a fundamental level, we're still going to be essentially the same kind of people as that sailor. Even if we transform ourselves with technological augments and genetic manipulation, which I suspect will meet much more resistance than some foresee, both in forms of people pushing back and things simply not working as intended, we'll have those same foundational human ideas for a very long time. Whatever the technology gap between ships of millennia ago, today, and perhaps millennia from now, the foundational idea of ships is always with us. As is the idea of frontiers. It may be fashionable to look at expansionism as an outmoded, distasteful relic of an unpleasant past, but I firmly believe that misses a basic truth about human societies. Yes, there are exceptions, but the bulk of human history is populations expanding into each other for territory, resources, or just because some folks want to go somewhere else. And it's not just a question of people going off to homestead or taking some new land for crops. It's the idea of there being somewhere else to go. Someplace that isn't the same as here. Now let's assume for the moment that faster than light travel is impossible. We can see the universe around us, but we can never book passage on the Millennium Falcon or sign up for a tour on the Enterprise to explore strange new worlds. Meanwhile, civilization on Earth becomes more integrated, more global, smaller. Walls, both physical and societal, go up around us, even if some of the walls lift between us. This idea of a visible universe that we can't ever reach has become a bit haunting for me. As an American in particular, there's a deep cultural resonance with the idea of the frontier, with going over the next hill to see what's there and building something new in the fertile plain beyond. And while the frontier has filled up, we keep some glimmer of that spirit alive in many small ways. Westerns, the road trip, and of course science fiction about intrepid explorers and dashing rogues in their ships going wherever they want. So what if we can't? What if the defining foundational concept going forward isn't the ship, but the wall? What does a frontier culture do when it finds itself in a look but don't touch universe? This isn't simply a case of existential dread born of too much idle contemplation. There are serious long-term social consequences in play here. So let's briefly revisit perhaps the most recognized story of space as a frontier, Star Trek. It's told through the eyes of Starfleet officers, of the military as they travel the galaxy in their starships, meeting new civilizations, but also projecting power and putting out fires of the diplomatic and military variety. Star Trek is a show about a space navy. Our Athenian Sailor would understand the basic ideas. Now, the military has historically served many roles in society, from the obvious as a tool of power and control to some less overt functions, one of them being a way to relieve societal pressures. Militaries are a great way to take restless and adventurous young men who might cause trouble, anything from rowdy hooliganism to revolution, and send them to go cause that trouble elsewhere. It applies both to those of the lower classes who could otherwise be turned to criminal or subversive activity, and traditionally the sons of the upper classes who could potentially lead revolts. Militaries and wars act as a safety valve to let them get some of that aggression and adventurism out of their system, and when they come back, they're more invested in the existing social order. Veterans with material benefits and social recognition. And we see hints of this with Starfleet in the highly competitive nature of its recruitment process and the glimpses of how the respected pillars of the institution, Starfleet captains, behaved in their youth. Kirk's exploits, both as something of a ladies' man and his creative solution to the Kobayashi Maru test, are core Trek. But it's shown most strikingly with Picard, who in his academy days was a reckless, combative braggart. What kind of man would Jean-Luc Picard have become without Starfleet? And by extension, what kind of society would come from generations of not having an outlet for rebellion, for aggression, for that longing to push out and test oneself against the world? Certainly we don't need wars for that. We can address those issues in other ways. But if done within a closed system with no frontiers for the most irascible to seek freedom or adventure in, and no stories of those exploits to distract the less reckless, it's all a zoo. Enrichment activities to keep the apes from going apeshit. That aspect is depicted rather well in The Expanse. Earth is an overcrowded, stagnant mess, while smaller populations live in habitats on Mars and in the asteroid belt. A few sites on outer planet moons. But humans are contained within the solar system, within known boundaries, Earth and some temporary housing scattered in the void. And all of those settlements are too close to be free of control from outside governments, corporations, and all the exploitation that comes with them. It's still essentially a closed system, with the exception of the Mormon-financed generation ship. The Expanse recognizes the key to this kind of project. There's no economic incentive to do this. There's no reasonable return on investment in financial terms, and the timescale is too long to make the investment even if it were a sound one otherwise. The motivation is cultural. Story. Not in the sense of, it's just a story, bro, but story as in how we see ourselves and our place in the world. A culture that sees itself as worthy of greatness or as an instrument of God's will isn't bound by strictly economic concerns. They're constrained only by the possible, not merely the sensible. If they can't zip across the galaxy in an instant, they'll do it slow. Less a starship in the Space Navy tradition and more an ark, drifting across a vast sea until at last it reaches land. A mobile city-state. Wait till I tell that Greek sailor about the polis in the sky. Even if we'll never have faster-than-light starships full of space sailors gallivanting across the cosmos, having adventures with pointy-eared sidekicks and green women, we're still capable of setting out in arcs for worlds unknown at appreciable fractions of the speed of light. But whether we ever do so is more a question of culture than of engineering and physics. We're in a time when deconstructing all our old stories is what we do. It produces some rather tedious reimaginings, but I don't think of it as the end of those stories or even necessarily a deliberate attempt to subvert them. It's a reaction to our modern stories creating expectations that didn't quite pan out, but the modern world not really offering anything other than more of the same. Including postmodernism, which often manifests as sort of the barter town of culture, making stuff out of the broken pieces of the old world and trying to sell it back to us. But on a much deeper cultural level, it's, I think, part of a process of calibration. It's not that we're abandoning the mythos of modernity so much as adjusting it. Perhaps deconstruction is more taking a compass reading than rejecting the course. We thought we could go in a straight line, but look, there's a big damn hole here and we need to go around it. We have a long history of explorer stories, and I think we're going to come back to that both in our fiction and in our worldview. The classics are classics because they transcend their time. Perhaps it's my own cultural conditioning or wishful thinking at work here, but I haven't completely given up on the possibility of faster-than-light travel. There are still big questions in physics, but even if it's impossible, or we never figure out how to do it, which aren't the same thing, I still believe that in time we will travel to the stars, even if we do it at a ponderously slow pace. A human diaspora and loose communication with signal delays of a generation or more. Because on some level we may have to. Most people, when given the chance, don't risk death and discomfort to venture into the unknown. But some do. Some need to. They push back boundaries, they make frontiers accessible, and they give the rest of us stories that inspire. But as a culture, we've been living on an old myth of progressive history in the frontier. We could shelve it, devote ourselves to making Earth a paradise, a tiny little bubble of life drifting in a vast sea. But like that hypothetical Picard without Starfleet, we should ask what kind of society we become if we don't have that outlet. If we decide to live inside walls without doors. Sure, not every frontier has to be a physical expanse. There's still a lot of inspiring work to be done in the sciences, for example, but up to now even that has happened within this progressive model. The abstract pursuit of knowledge doesn't inspire us in the same way. Otherwise, we'd have a lot more hype for blockbuster lectures at our universities. We may need some iteration of that expansionist, explorer, adventuring in exotic lands story, because it's the idea of pushing boundaries, the idea that there's something more in the world than what's right in front of us, not in a religious sense, but right now on the mundane dirt realm of the physical universe. Just as 19th century culture was shaped by tales of the pioneers and explorers in exotic locales around the world, today it's shaped by reimaginings of those stories set on other worlds, because our world has gotten too small. And like the older stories, not everyone needs to jump on a ship and see the far-flung places. It's enough that a small percentage are willing to take the risks. That's enough to feed the wider culture's need. As an aside here, I'm reminded of the famous ad for Ernest Shackleton's Antarctic expedition. Men wanted for hazardous journey, low wages, bitter cold, long hours of complete darkness, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in event of success. The oft-cited ad itself is almost certainly a fiction. To my knowledge, no one has ever been able to verify that it actually ran anywhere. But that only makes it more relevant here. That the story of a dismal recruiting pitch gets so much traction and endures, it speaks to something in us. If SpaceX ran the same ad for Mars colonists, they'd be flooded with applicants. We're not doomed to stagnation if we don't make some magic FTL breakthrough and discover planets so Earth-like that you could step out and start homesteading. We have enough around us to feed the story. Say what you will about Elon Musk, but if he can actually get people to Mars and they don't all die, that could rejuvenate that frontier progressive thread in our culture for generations. It points to a future that looks more like The Expanse than Star Trek, but it also points to that next big step of intrepid founders of worlds setting out to grow a new branch of humanity. And if we figure out warp drive along the way, all the better. But if we don't, we'll still be able to point up at a red dot in the sky and say, I could go up there with those crazy sons of bitches. Might just do it. Almost certainly won't, but that's not really the point. Of course, many will rightly point out that humans can't live on Mars, or in asteroids, or anywhere else but Earth. But most of Earth is fatal to no-tech humans too. We're a tool-making species, and we transmit knowledge through culture and language. The technology we need to live on Mars is much more complex than fire using animal skins as an insulating layer and crafting goat bladders into watertight bags so we can cross deserts. But we've also learned a lot since then. Our technology has always been a part of us in some sense. We don't have claws or thick fur, wings or night vision. We have to make those things. And we make ships, often to get away from something as much as to get to something else. Whether primitive hunter-gatherers wondering if life is better on the other side of the distant mountains to colonists leaving crowded London for the promise of wide open spaces in America, to the vision of mankind settling Mars and beyond. We've always been able to tell ourselves, someday we're going to go there, even if we knew that personally we never would. But we have problems on Earth to solve, I hear drifting on the wind. Yes, we most certainly do. The old retort is, when will we be ready? When will things be perfect and we can look up again? But what I'm trying to say here is that it goes much deeper than that. We're not just talking about giving up a story. We're collectively deciding whether to build a wall, a cultural barrier that says, we have this finite land and resources, let's make the best of it until it's gone, or we are. The species-level equivalent of fixing up the house and tending to the yard in retirement. The stars are not for man. We're facing a civilizational choice about what we want to build. Ships or walls. Walls are easier, safer, but I don't think we'll do well in permanent species-level captivity. A few little off-world settlements could provide immense value culturally, even if economically it's dubious. And eventually we're going to need a starship, even if a slow pig of a starship is the best we can do. It's not the world's most accessible office, but I like it.